No, we're not doing any of those old recipes. I see. Let's discuss other options then. But those are family recipes. This tastes just like his. Mom, I told you it was a special recipe. They're amazing, right? No, this is his recipe. Where did you get this? I know this taste. I know you. Impossible. I've never made this before. But I remember this from before. I think I remember you too. You shouldn't know that. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Oh my God, how did you know? We need to leave now.
My daughter Caroline leaned toward the caterer and smiled as if I weren't sitting 3 feet away. My mother's recipes were lovely in their day, she said. But they're outdated. We need something more sophisticated for Nathan's wedding. I felt every word land like a slap, but I kept my hands folded in my lap. Then Denise placed a small dish of herb-roasted chicken gratin in front of us. I took one bite. Sage, celery, cream, and the tiny touch of Dijon Herald had added to my recipe 40 years ago. Before I could speak, Emily tasted hers. Her fork stopped halfway to the plate. She stared at me, eyes suddenly wet. Mrs. Stafford, is this your Sunday chicken casserole? Caroline's face went completely white. If you've ever had someone make you feel ashamed of something you created with love, tell me what you would have done. And before I tell you how a bride I barely knew recognized my casserole by name, please like this video, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love knowing who is sitting at this table with me. 4 months before that tasting, I had no reason to believe a chicken casserole could expose everything my daughter had spent years trying to hide. My name is Gwendolyn Stafford. I was 68 years old, and I had lived in Franklin, Tennessee long enough to remember when some of the roads now lined with expensive subdivisions were still bordered by pasture. I wasn't a chef. I never went to culinary school or owned a restaurant. For 32 years, I worked in the cafeteria of an elementary school, eventually becoming the kitchen manager. It wasn't glamorous work. I arrived before sunrise, wore sensible shoes, tied my apron tight, and spent my mornings making sure hundreds of children had something warm to eat. And I was proud of it. My late husband Harold used to tell people, "Gwen has fed half of Williamson County." That was an exaggeration. But some days it didn't feel like one. Harold and I were married for 41 years. We raised our only daughter Caroline in a modest 3-bedroom house, with a narrow front porch and a kitchen that always seemed too small whenever company came. We were never wealthy. There were years when I knew the exact balance in our checking account down to the dollar. Harold worked maintenance for a manufacturing company, and whenever something broke at home, he fixed it himself, because paying someone else wasn't always an option. But our house was never empty. There was always somebody at our table. A neighbor going through a divorce, a teacher whose husband had lost his job, someone from church recovering from surgery, a new mother too exhausted to cook. Harold believed you didn't need to solve somebody's entire problem to make their evening a little easier. Sometimes all you needed was a hot meal. That was how my Sunday chicken casserole became part of our family. The original recipe came from my mother, but over the years I changed almost everything about it. I added celery, sage, more chicken, less salt, and a biscuit topping instead of crackers. Harold made the final change. One Sunday afternoon, he stood beside me while I was stirring the sauce and said, "Put some mustard in it." I looked at him as though he'd suggested motor oil. "Mustard, Dijon." "Since when do you know about Dijon mustard?" He shrugged. "Saw it on a cooking show." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the spoon. But I tried it, just a small amount, and somehow he was right. After that, every time someone complimented the casserole, Harold would lean back in his chair and say, "It's the mustard." I would tell him not to get too proud of himself. He always did anyway. Eventually, the recipe stopped belonging only to us. Our church organized meal trains whenever someone was sick, grieving, recovering from surgery, welcoming a baby, or simply going through a season when life had become too heavy. I became one of the women people called. Sometimes Harold drove while I balanced foil-covered dishes on my lap. We delivered meals all over Franklin, Brentwood, Spring Hill, and sometimes farther out toward Murfreesboro when another church needed help. I rarely remembered every family afterward. That may sound strange, but there were so many. I remembered pieces. A yellow front door. A little boy holding a stuffed dinosaur. An elderly man who cried because the peach cobbler tasted like his wife's. A young mother who apologized repeatedly because her apartment wasn't clean. But names faded. Addresses disappeared. I never imagined any of those evenings would matter again. Then Harold died. A heart attack took him on an ordinary Tuesday morning 4 years before Nathan's wedding. There was no long goodbye, no chance to prepare. He kissed my forehead before leaving for an appointment and never walked through our kitchen door again. For months afterward, I hated cooking. Every pan reminded me of him. Every cabinet held something he'd touched. And that ridiculous little jar of Dijon mustard sat inside my refrigerator door until it expired because I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Eventually, though, cooking became the thing that brought me back, especially when Nathan visited. Nathan Whitmore was Caroline's only child and my only grandchild. At 27, he was tall like Harold, with the same habit of leaning against the kitchen counter and stealing pieces of food before dinner. Quality control, he'd say. Thievery, I'd answer. He never cared that my house wasn't fashionable. He never cared that my plates didn't match. He would come straight from work, loosen his tie, open my refrigerator, and ask what I was making. Then one Sunday he arrived with Emily Carter. I'd met girlfriends before, of course. This was different. I knew within 20 minutes. Emily didn't spend dinner trying to impress anyone. She asked questions and listened to the answers. When I mentioned Harold, she didn't give me that uncomfortable look people sometimes give widows as if mentioning the dead might spoil the evening. Instead, she asked, "What was he like?" So I told her. Nathan watched her while I spoke. That was when I knew. 2 months later, he called me. "Grandma, are you sitting down?" "I am now." He laughed nervously. Then he said, "Emily said yes." I cried before he finished the sentence. The engagement brought something joyful back into our family. At least that was what I believed. Caroline immediately took charge. My daughter had built a successful career in corporate event planning in Nashville. She could organize a conference for 800 people without raising her voice. She knew florists, photographers, venue managers, rental companies, and caterers. So when she offered to help Nathan and Emily plan their wedding, it seemed natural. "I can save them from making expensive mistakes," she told me. I agreed. At first, Caroline's excitement seemed almost sweet. She created spreadsheets, color palettes, guest categories, venue comparisons. Within 2 weeks, she had toured 6 properties. Within 3, she was talking about linen textures. Then something happened during Sunday dinner at my house. Nathan was eating his second helping of casserole when he pointed his fork toward the dish. "You know what we should have at the wedding?" Caroline looked up. "What? This?" I laughed. "Chicken casserole." "Why not?" Caroline's expression changed, only slightly. But I saw it. Nathan continued unaware. "Grandpa loved it. Everybody in the family knows it. We could have one thing at the reception that actually feels like us." Emily smiled. "I love that." Something flickered across her face when she looked at the casserole. I noticed it, but before I could understand it, Caroline placed her wineglass down. "Let's not start designing the menu yet." Her voice was pleasant. Too pleasant. Nathan shrugged. "I was just saying." Caroline smiled again, but there was tension behind it. "We're putting a lot into making this wedding special. Let's wait until you've seen what the caterers can do before we start adding things." Adding things. That was how she described the food she'd eaten since childhood. Nathan didn't argue. Neither did I. But later, after everyone had gone home, I stood alone in my kitchen, washing the casserole dish. For reasons I couldn't explain, I kept hearing Caroline's words. "What the caterers can do." I looked toward the old recipe box on the counter. Harold's handwriting was still on some of those cards. I touched the lid and smiled sadly. "You'd tell me I'm imagining things," I whispered. But I wasn't. Because that dinner was the first time I understood something had changed in my daughter. And a week later, Caroline would say something about my cooking in front of the entire family that made it impossible for me to pretend otherwise. A week after Nathan suggested serving my casserole at the wedding, Caroline invited us to dinner at her house. I should have known it wasn't going to be an ordinary family meal when I found 3 wedding venue brochures beside my plate. Caroline and Thomas lived in a newer development south of Nashville, in one of those houses with ceilings so high, I sometimes wondered who was supposed to change the light bulbs. Everything in Caroline's home was beautiful, coordinated, and carefully chosen. That evening, she was glowing. "I found it," she announced. Nathan looked up. "Found what?" "The venue." She slid a brochure across the table. On the cover was a restored historic estate surrounded by enormous oak trees. The photographs showed white columns, manicured gardens, stone terraces, and a reception hall with chandeliers hanging from exposed wooden beams. "It's outside Nashville," Caroline explained. "Private grounds, beautiful bridal suite. They only host a limited number of weddings each year." Emily picked up the brochure. "It's gorgeous." "I knew you'd love it." Caroline sounded relieved. Nathan glanced at Emily. "If you love it, I love it." Thomas chuckled. "That's the smartest thing you've said since you got engaged." Everyone laughed. I did too. There was nothing wrong with wanting a beautiful wedding. But as dinner continued, I noticed Caroline wasn't talking about how the wedding should feel. She talked about how it would look. The photographs, the floral installations, the champagne wall, the tablescapes. She mentioned that several of Emily's relatives would be traveling in from Atlanta and Charlotte. Then she said something that caught my attention. "We want people to understand the level of event they're attending from the moment they arrive." Nathan frowned slightly. "The level? You know what I mean." "I'm not sure I do." Caroline waved her hand. "Presentation, experience, first impressions." Emily smiled politely. "Honestly, I just want everyone to have a good time." "Of course," Caroline said, "but details matter." Then she began discussing catering. The venue had her preferred list, and Caroline had already contacted several companies. She described tiny crab cakes, bourbon-glazed salmon, braised short ribs, truffle mashed potatoes, and something involving goat cheese that sounded too complicated for me to remember. Nathan listened for a while. Then he grinned at me. "Grandma, I'm still voting for the casserole." I laughed. "Don't drag me into this." "I'm serious." He looked at Emily. "Tell her." Emily nodded. "I think having one family recipe would be wonderful." My heart warmed. "Well, if that's what you two want, I'd be honored." Nathan pointed toward Caroline. "See?" Caroline didn't smile. She took a sip of wine. Then she gave a short laugh. "This is a wedding, Nathan, not a church potluck." The room went quiet. Not dramatically. Nobody dropped a glass. Nobody shouted. But I felt something inside me go still. Nathan lowered his fork. "I didn't say we should serve it in aluminum foil." Thomas tried to laugh. "Your mother's just thinking about the overall menu." But Caroline wasn't finished. "I know everyone loves Mom's cooking, I do too, but we're talking about an elegant reception with nearly 200 guests." She looked at me. "There's a difference between sentimental food and wedding food." I forced a smile. "Caroline, it's all right." Nathan looked at me. "No, Grandma, I didn't mean." "I know exactly what you meant." I reached across and touched his wrist. "And I appreciate it." I wanted the moment over. That was something I'd become very good at over the years, making uncomfortable moments disappear. When Caroline was a teenager and snapped at me, I told myself she was tired. When she forgot to invite me somewhere, I told myself she was busy. When she corrected the way I pronounced something in front of her colleagues, I laughed with everyone else. Keeping peace had always seemed kinder than demanding an apology. But that night, Caroline's words followed me. Church potluck. Sentimental food. Not wedding food. After dinner, Nathan and Thomas went outside to look at something in Nathan's truck. Emily was helping gather plates when Caroline touched my arm. "Mom, can I talk to you?" We stepped into the kitchen. She lowered her voice. "I hope I didn't hurt your feelings." That should have been an apology. It wasn't. "You embarrassed me a little," I admitted. Caroline sighed. "I wasn't trying to embarrass you. I'm trying to make sure this wedding feels appropriate." "Appropriate for whom?" She blinked. "For Nathan and Emily." Then Nathan asked for my casserole. "Because he's sentimental." And Emily agreed. Caroline began stacking plates. "Emily is being gracious." Something about the word bothered me. "Gracious." Caroline stopped. Mom, some of Emily's extended family are accustomed to a certain standard. There it was. Not food, standard. I studied my daughter's face. What standard do you think I come from? Please don't do that. Do what? Turn this into something personal. You just told me my food isn't good enough because certain people will be attending. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Caroline exhaled sharply. This is exactly why I didn't want to have this conversation. I stared at her. Are you ashamed of my cooking? No. Are you ashamed that I worked in a school cafeteria? Her eyes flickered. Only for a second. But mothers notice seconds. Mom, that's ridiculous. Then explain it to me. It's about presentation. She picked up another plate. We're spending a lot of money on this wedding. The menu should reflect that. I almost laughed. My casserole costs about $18 to make, so I suppose it doesn't qualify. That's not what I mean. I know. She looked at me then. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I suddenly remembered Caroline at 8 years old sitting on our kitchen counter while I stirred that same casserole. At 16, bringing friends home and asking if there was enough for everyone. At 22, calling from her first apartment because she'd forgotten how much sage to use. When had those memories become embarrassing? I didn't know. Before I could ask, Emily appeared in the doorway carrying 2 glasses. Can I help? Caroline immediately smiled. We're fine. Emily looked between us. She knew we weren't. Later, while Caroline was upstairs finding fabric samples, Emily sat beside me in the living room. Can I ask you something? Of course. That casserole Nathan keeps talking about. I smiled. What about it? How long have you been making it? Goodness, more than 40 years. Something changed in her expression. 40, at least. Did you ever make it for people outside your family? The question surprised me. All the time. Like who? Neighbors, teachers, church families, anyone who needed feeding. Emily stared at me. Did you ever take meals out toward Murfreesboro? Before I could answer, Caroline returned carrying a stack of ivory fabric swatches. Emily, come look at these. The planner needs a decision tomorrow. Emily hesitated. Then she stood. We'll finish this conversation later. I watched her cross the room. She glanced back once. There was something in her eyes I couldn't identify. Recognition, perhaps. Or sadness. At the time, I thought Caroline's embarrassment was the biggest problem developing around that wedding. I was wrong. Because while my daughter was trying to distance herself from my past, the woman marrying my grandson was quietly trying to find her way into it. And somehow, my Sunday chicken casserole was the reason. In the weeks that followed, Caroline didn't push me out of the wedding all at once. If she had, I might have recognized what she was doing sooner. Instead, she erased me by inches. The first thing I noticed was a dress appointment. Emily called me one Tuesday afternoon while I was trimming dead leaves from the basil on my kitchen windowsill. We missed you today, she said. Missed me where? There was a pause. At the bridal boutique. I set the scissors down. What bridal boutique? Another pause. Longer this time. The bridesmaid and family dress appointment. Caroline said you couldn't make it. I stared through the window at Harold's old bird feeder. She did. She said standing that long would bother your knees. My knees were 68 years old, but they worked perfectly well. That was thoughtful of her, I said. The lie came automatically. Emily sounded uncertain. I thought you knew. I'm sure there was just a misunderstanding. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for several minutes. Then I called Caroline. She answered on the 4th ring. Mom, I'm heading into a meeting. I heard there was a dress appointment today. Silence. Then, oh, that. Yes, that. It was mostly bridesmaids. Emily said family, too. Caroline sighed. Mom, you weren't going to buy your dress there anyway. Everything was overpriced. I almost smiled at the irony. A month earlier, my cooking had apparently been too inexpensive for her wedding. Now she was protecting me from expensive dresses. You told Emily my knees couldn't handle it. I said you probably wouldn't want to stand around for hours. That's different. Is it? Yes. She sighed again. I was trying to make things easier for you. Before I could answer, she said she really had to go. I let her. 3 days later, Nathan stopped by after work. He opened my refrigerator as usual and found leftover meatloaf. Mom says you've been wanting to take it easy with all the wedding stuff, he said while making himself a plate. I turned around slowly. She said that, yeah, she said all the planning was wearing you out. I looked at my grandson. He wasn't accusing me, he genuinely believed it. Have I seemed worn out to you? He glanced up. No. Have I complained? No. I nearly told him everything. But then I saw how happy he was. His wedding was less than 3 months away. He was working full-time helping Emily coordinate her move, answering endless questions about guest lists and transportation. I couldn't bear to add another problem. Then don't worry about me, I said. Nathan studied me for another second. Grandma, I'm fine. That became my favorite lie. I'm fine. Women of my generation were trained in those 2 words. They could cover anger, loneliness, humiliation, grief. And I used them far too often. The bridal shower finally made it impossible to ignore the pattern. Caroline hosted it at a private dining room in a Nashville hotel. Everything was pale pink and cream, from the flowers to the little boxes of macarons placed beside each plate. I arrived early carrying a gift for Emily. Caroline looked surprised to see me. You're early. You told me 11. I said 11:30. I pulled out my phone. Her text clearly said 11. Caroline barely looked. Must have been a typo. I helped arrange gifts anyway. By noon the room was full. Emily's aunts had traveled from Georgia. Her cousins came from North Carolina. Caroline floated between tables, introducing everyone. I watched her introduce one woman as a senior vice president at a healthcare company. Another relative was described as an attorney. When she reached me, Caroline rested a hand lightly on my shoulder. And this is Gwendolyn, Nathan's grandmother. That was it. Not his grandmother who had practically kept him every summer until he was 12. Not the woman who taught him to make biscuits. Just Nathan's grandmother. I told myself I was being sensitive. Then Caroline introduced Thomas's sister and spent 2 full minutes describing her interior design business. I felt foolish for caring. But being diminished doesn't always happen through insults. Sometimes it's what someone deliberately leaves unsaid. Emily noticed. She came over afterward and hugged me. I'm glad you're here. Where else would I be? Her expression shifted. That's what I thought. Before I could ask what she meant, someone called her away. Later, Nathan approached me near the dessert table. You doing okay? Perfectly. Mom said these long events can tire you out. I looked across the room. Caroline was laughing with 2 women near the windows. Your mother has developed an impressive knowledge of my physical condition. Nathan frowned. What does that mean? I almost told him. Again. But this was Emily's shower, so I smiled. It means your grandmother needs another cup of coffee. That evening I went home angry with Caroline, and even angrier with myself. Harold would never have allowed me to pretend nothing was happening. I could almost hear him. Gwen, keeping peace isn't the same as surrendering your voice. A few days later, Caroline came to my house unexpectedly. I was folding laundry upstairs when I heard the back door. Mom. In the bedroom. When I came downstairs, I found her in my kitchen. She was standing beside the counter with my wooden recipe box open. Her phone was in her hand. What are you doing? She startled, then smiled. Taking pictures. Of my recipes. Just a few. She lifted the phone. Nathan asked me about putting together some family things for after the wedding. That sounded plausible. What kind of family things? A keepsake, maybe a little recipe collection. My suspicions softened. Nathan had always loved family traditions. That's sweet. I thought so. She began flipping through the cards again. I stepped closer. The box contained more than recipes. There were pieces of my life. My mother's handwriting. A biscuit recipe from my Aunt Jean. Harold's notes. One card still had a coffee stain shaped like Tennessee. Caroline lifted the Sunday Chicken Casserole card. I smiled. Your father always claimed half that recipe belonged to him because of the mustard. I remember. She held her phone above the card. Click. For a moment, Caroline stared at the image she'd taken. There was something almost calculating in her expression. Then it disappeared. Did Nathan specifically ask for that one? I asked. Caroline looked at me. He loves it, doesn't he? Yes. She slid the card back into the box. Then, of course. I wanted to ask more. Instead, I helped her find my mother's cornbread recipe. After she left, I stood in the kitchen looking at the box. Something bothered me. I opened it. The casserole card was there. So were Harold's handwritten notes. Nothing was missing. I told myself I was becoming suspicious because my feelings had been hurt. Maybe Caroline really was making a keepsake. Maybe the missed appointments were misunderstandings. Maybe I was turning ordinary mistakes into evidence because I wanted an explanation for the distance growing between us. Then my phone rang. It was Emily. Mrs. Stafford. Emily, sweetheart, you can call me Gwendolyn. She laughed softly. I'm trying. Something in her voice sounded nervous. Is everything all right? Yes. I just wanted to ask you something. Go ahead. Caroline told me you don't want any responsibilities at the wedding because crowds make you anxious. My hand tightened around the phone. She told you that? Yes. I closed my eyes. Another lie. No, Emily. Crowds don't make me anxious. Oh. And I never said I didn't want to be involved. Silence. Then Emily spoke very quietly. I didn't think you did. My heart began beating harder. What else has Caroline told you? Emily hesitated. Maybe we should talk in person. After we hung up, I looked toward the recipe box again. For the first time, I stopped asking myself whether Caroline was excluding me. I knew she was. The question had changed. Why? And somewhere beneath that question was another one I hadn't yet thought to ask. Why had my daughter photographed the very recipe she'd already said had no place at her Esson's wedding 3 mornings after Emily's phone call? I opened my recipe box to make cornbread for a neighbor who had just come home from knee surgery. The Sunday Chicken Casserole card was gone. At first, I assumed I'd overlooked it. The box was crowded with decades of recipes, some written neatly on index cards, and others scribbled on scraps of paper. I emptied everything onto the kitchen table. My mother's cornbread, Aunt Jean's biscuits, Harold's chili, my peach cobbler. The casserole card wasn't there. I searched the counter, the drawer beside the stove, even the refrigerator because at 68, I was willing to admit I'd occasionally put something where it didn't belong. Nothing. Then I remembered Caroline standing in my kitchen with her phone. I sat down. The card itself wasn't valuable to anyone else, but to me it was irreplaceable. The original was written in my handwriting from almost 30 years earlier. Along the bottom, Harold had added, More Dijon. Trust me. H. I'd drawn a line through more and written, Do not trust him. Every time I saw it, I smiled. That little argument had outlived him, and now the card was missing. I called Caroline. Did you take my casserole recipe? She answered too quickly. What? The card. It's gone. I photographed it, Mom. You saw me. Did you take it afterward? No. I heard papers moving on her end. Are you sure you didn't put it somewhere else? I've emptied the whole box. Maybe Nathan borrowed it. Without telling me. You know how he is. Actually, I did. Nathan would have asked. Caroline, if you took it, just tell me. Her voice sharpened. I didn't take your recipe. All right. I have to go. The call ended. For the rest of that day, the missing card bothered me more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't about chicken. It was Harold's handwriting. That evening I searched again. Still nothing. 2 days later, the card was back. I opened the recipe box to put away a new recipe someone from church had given me, and there it was, right near the front. I stared at it. I knew I hadn't missed it. I'd emptied every card onto the table. Someone had returned it. That afternoon, Caroline stopped by carrying coffee. She walked into the kitchen as though nothing had happened. I was nearby. I placed the card on the counter between us. You returned it. She froze for half a second. Then she set down the coffee. Oh, that single word told me everything. You said you didn't take it. I forgot. You forgot taking something from my house. She sighed. Mom, please. Why did you need the original after photographing it? Caroline pulled out a chair. I told you. I'm putting together something for Nathan. A keepsake. Yes. Then why lie? I didn't lie. I forgot I had slipped it into my purse. I looked at her. My daughter had always been an excellent organizer. She remembered vendor deposits 6 months in advance. She remembered birthdays of executives she hadn't seen in years. But she had somehow forgotten taking my most important recipe. What are you making, Ma? A family collection. May I see it? When it's finished. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It's supposed to be a surprise. I wanted to press harder. Instead, I looked down at Harold's handwriting. The card was back. I told myself that was enough. It wasn't. The next Sunday, Emily came to visit alone. She arrived carrying flowers and a bakery box. No Nathan, I asked. He's helping my cousin move. And Caroline. Emily smiled. I didn't invite Caroline. That made me laugh. We sat at my kitchen table drinking coffee. Emily seemed distracted. Eventually, she looked toward my refrigerator where I kept photographs of family members under magnets. One showed Harold and me at a church picnic nearly 20 years earlier. Emily stood. Is that your husband? Saw Harold. She moved closer. He went with you when you delivered meals. Most of the time. Did you ever deliver meals to people you didn't know? Constantly. Emily turned toward me. How did that work? I explained that churches sometimes contacted one another when families needed support. Names went onto lists. Volunteers selected dates. You really don't remember everybody. Sweetheart, after 30 years I couldn't. What about Murfreesboro? The same place she'd mentioned before. I put down my coffee. You asked me about Murfreesboro at Caroline's. Emily looked embarrassed. I know. Why? She hesitated. Did you deliver meals there around 2008? Probably. To families dealing with cancer. That narrowed it. I closed my eyes, searching through old memories. There were several. Do you remember a woman with a little girl? I smiled sadly. That describes more families than you might think. Emily looked down. I could see disappointment. Why are you asking me this? She rubbed her thumb along the edge of her coffee mug. My mother was sick when I was little. I already knew Rebecca Carter had died years earlier, but Emily rarely discussed details. I'm sorry. Breast cancer. My heart softened. How old were you? 9 when she was first diagnosed. Murfreesboro, 9 years old. Something stirred at the edge of my memory, but I couldn't catch it. Was your family part of a meal train? Emily's eyes filled. Before she could answer, her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Caroline. Emily declined the call. Almost immediately it rang again. She turned it face down. Emily. She looked at me. What are you trying to remember? For several seconds she said nothing. Then she reached across the table and touched my hand. I think there's something I need to tell you. My breath caught. Tell me. But Emily shook her head. Not yet. Why? Because I'm not completely sure, and I don't want to give you half of something this important. I studied her face. Does Caroline know? That question changed everything. Emily's eyes shifted away, not dramatically, but enough. Emily. She stood and carried her cup to the sink. I should go. I followed her with my eyes. Does Caroline know what you're asking me about? She turned. I've talked to her about some of it. My stomach tightened. What did she say? Emily gave me a sad little smile. That's part of why I came here. Then she hugged me. It wasn't a casual goodbye. She held me tightly. As she stepped away, she glanced at the recipe box. Do you still have the original casserole recipe? My pulse jumped. Yes. Keep it somewhere safe. Then she left. I stood at the window watching her car disappear. Afterward, I returned to the kitchen. I opened the wooden box. I removed the casserole card and held it beneath the light. My handwriting. Harold's joke. A faint grease stain near one corner. Nothing extraordinary. Except suddenly 2 women were behaving as though that card mattered very much. My daughter had secretly removed it. My grandson's fiancé had warned me to protect it. And both of them knew more than they were telling me. I carried the card upstairs and placed it inside the small fireproof box where I kept Harold's death certificate, our marriage license, and the deed to the house. For the first time in my life, I locked away a recipe. A week later, Caroline finally invited me to meet the wedding caterer. I thought perhaps things were improving. I didn't know that Caroline had already given the caterer exactly what she'd taken from my kitchen. And when I saw one particular folder on that caterer's table, I would begin to understand that the missing recipe card had never been about Nathan's keepsake at all. The catering consultation was held on a Thursday afternoon at the wedding estate, nearly an hour from my house. Caroline texted me the address the night before. No apology for excluding me from previous meetings, no explanation for suddenly including me. Just menu consultation tomorrow at 2. Please be on time. I arrived at 1:45. Old habits. When you've spent 32 years responsible for feeding hundreds of school children, before noon being late stops feeling like an option. The estate was even more beautiful than the photographs. Tall oak trees shaded the long driveway, and white hydrangeas bordered a stone walkway leading toward the main building. Beyond it, I could see the reception hall through enormous windows. For a moment, I understood Caroline's excitement. It really was lovely. Then I walked inside and found my daughter already seated at a long table with Emily and a woman I hadn't met. Nathan was stuck at work and planned to join us for the official tasting later. "Mom," Caroline said, glancing at her watch, "you're early." "I usually am." The woman stood and offered her hand. Denise Morgan. She was probably in her early 50s with silver threaded through her dark hair and the calm manner of someone accustomed to nervous brides and demanding mothers. Gwendolyn Stafford. Denise's expression changed slightly. "Stafford?" "Yes." She glanced at Caroline. It lasted perhaps 1 second, but I noticed. "I'm glad you're here," Denise said. Caroline immediately opened a leather folder. "We've already narrowed most of the menu." Of course they had. Denise began reviewing the selections. Past appetizers, salad, entrees, vegetable sides, dessert station. Everything sounded delicious and expensive. I listened quietly until Denise reached a section labeled Family Traditions. She looked around the table. "This is where I usually ask whether there are any dishes connected to the couple or their families. Something meaningful." Emily immediately turned toward me. "Actually," Caroline interrupted, "we've discussed that." Emily's mouth tightened. Denise looked between them. "And," Caroline smiled, "my mother has several recipes everyone remembers fondly, but they're not really appropriate for this particular event." I felt heat rise into my face. Denise looked at me. "What kind of recipes?" Before I could answer, Caroline did. "Old-fashioned casseroles, potluck dishes, things like that." Emily leaned back. "Caroline." "What? You don't have to describe them that way. I'm describing them accurately." "No," Emily said. "You're describing them dismissively." The air changed. I had never heard Emily challenge Caroline so directly. Caroline gave a strained laugh. "We're talking about food." "No, we're talking about Gwendolyn's food." I touched Emily's arm. "It's all right." She looked at me. "No, it really isn't." Denise quietly closed her folder. "Family recipes don't have to be sophisticated to belong at a wedding." Caroline's jaw tightened. "I understand that, but we're trying to maintain a cohesive vision." There was that word again. Vision. "What exactly is the vision?" I asked. Caroline looked surprised that I'd spoken. "Elegant, contemporary, refined. And my cooking prevents that, Mom." "I'm asking." She lowered her voice. "Your recipes are wonderful in their own context." "What context?" "Home. Apparently not weddings." Emily shook her head. Caroline looked at me with the expression she used when she thought I was deliberately misunderstanding something obvious. "Your food doesn't fit the vision." The sentence landed harder than I expected. Maybe because this time there was a stranger sitting across from me. Maybe because Emily had tried to defend me. Or maybe because I was finally tired of pretending Caroline's words didn't hurt. I folded my hands. "I spent 32 years feeding children, Caroline. I know. I've cooked for funerals, Baptisms, anniversaries, graduations, sick families, new mothers, and people who had nothing in their refrigerators. Mom, nobody is criticizing your life. It sounds remarkably similar. Denise shifted in her chair. Caroline's cheeks reddened. Can we please not turn a catering meeting into family therapy? Emily answered before I could. Then stop insulting her. Caroline stared at her. I am trying to give you the wedding you deserve. The wedding I deserve includes people I love. Silence. For the first time, I saw something in Caroline's expression that wasn't irritation. It was fear. Not fear of Emily, fear of losing control. Denise cleared her throat. Why don't we take 5 minutes? Caroline stood immediately. Good idea. She picked up her phone and walked toward the terrace. Emily remained seated. I'm sorry. You have nothing to apologize for. I should have said something sooner. That caught my attention. Sooner about what? Emily looked toward the terrace. Before she could answer, Denise returned carrying another stack of folders. She placed them near the end of the table. One slid sideways. I could read the label. Family Heritage Adaptation. My stomach tightened. What's that? Denise stopped. Caroline came through the doors at almost the same moment. Her eyes followed mine. The folder, I said. Family Heritage Adaptation. Caroline crossed the room quickly. That's not relevant yet. She picked it up. Relevant to what? The tasting. What's being adapted? Denise looked uncomfortable. Caroline answered. Several menu concepts. From whose family? Mom, please. I looked at Denise. She seemed like an honest woman caught in someone else's lie. Is one of my recipes in there? Caroline closed the folder firmly. No one is stealing your recipes. I hadn't used the word stealing. That bothered me more than anything else she'd said. I asked whether one was in there. We're experimenting with flavors. Whose flavors? Caroline's voice hardened. You wanted to be included. I'm including you. Can we not create a problem where there isn't one? I stared at my daughter. A month earlier, I would have apologized. I would have told her she was right. Instead, I said, you took my casserole card without permission. Emily's head turned sharply. Denise looked at Caroline. Caroline froze. I returned it. After telling me you hadn't taken it. I explained that. No, you explained it away. Emily whispered. Caroline, you took the original. It was for reference. For what? Caroline didn't answer. That was answer enough. Denise gathered the folders. The official tasting is next Tuesday. Perhaps we should finish the rest then. Caroline nodded quickly. Fine. The meeting ended 20 minutes early. Outside. Emily caught my arm. Gwendolyn. I turned. She looked shaken. Please come to the tasting Tuesday. I wasn't planning to miss it. No, I mean promise me. Why? She glanced toward Caroline, who was speaking to Denise near the entrance. Because I think there's something on that menu you need to taste yourself. My skin prickled. Do you know what's in that folder? Emily hesitated. Not exactly. But you suspect? She nodded. Before I could ask more, Caroline called her name. Emily squeezed my hand. Tuesday. Then she walked away. I drove home with the windows down, even though the afternoon was hot. When I reached my kitchen, I went upstairs and opened the fireproof box. The casserole card was still there. I read Harold's note again. More Dijon. Trust me. For some reason, tears filled my eyes. I pressed my thumb over his handwriting. Caroline could copy the ingredients. She could photograph the card. She could put my food on expensive china and call it something sophisticated. But there were details in that recipe she couldn't understand because she hadn't created them. Memories had flavors. Grief did too. So did love. The following Tuesday, I walked into the official tasting, determined not to be embarrassed by my daughter again. I didn't know that within an hour, Denise would place a beautifully plated dish in front of me, with a name I'd never heard before. And after one bite, I would recognize 40 years of my own life hiding underneath it. The official tasting took place the following Tuesday, in a private room overlooking the estate gardens. I arrived determined to keep my emotions under control. Nathan was already there beside Emily. Thomas sat across from them, scrolling through his phone, while Caroline arranged menu sheets as if she were preparing for a corporate presentation. Denise entered from the kitchen. "Everyone ready?" Nathan grinned. "I skipped lunch for this." That earned a laugh. Even Caroline smiled. For the first 20 minutes, everything was pleasant. We tasted miniature crab cakes, a salad with roasted pears, braised short ribs, salmon, and several vegetable sides. Nathan liked nearly everything. Emily was harder to read. She kept glancing at me. Then Denise removed the plates. "We have one additional dish." Caroline straightened. I noticed immediately. "What is it?" Nathan asked. Denise hesitated. "A heritage-inspired option we've been developing." Her eyes moved toward Caroline. Caroline gave a tiny nod. Two servers entered carrying small white dishes. What they placed in front of me looked nothing like anything I'd ever served. Pieces of roasted chicken rested beneath a golden topping. There were herbs arranged carefully on top, and a thin cream sauce around the edge of the plate. Denise said herb roasted chicken gratin with toasted brioche and cream reduction. Nathan whistled. "That's a mouthful." Caroline smiled. "It's more elevated. More elevated than what nobody said it." But I felt the answer. I picked up my fork. The first bite stopped me cold. Celery. Not just celery. Celery softened in butter before being added to the sauce. Exactly how I did it. Then sage, chicken, cream. The topping was different. Denise had replaced my biscuit mixture with toasted brioche. But beneath that expensive little costume, I knew the dish. I took another bite. My heart began pounding. There. The faint sharpness at the end. Dijon mustard. For a second, I wasn't sitting in an elegant wedding venue. I was 40 years younger, standing in my old kitchen, while Harold leaned against the counter. "Put some mustard in it." Mustard Dijon. I looked across the table at Caroline. She was watching me. The moment our eyes met, she looked away. That was when I knew. Not suspected. Knew. I placed my fork down. "Denise." She looked at me. "Yes." "Where did this recipe come from?" Caroline answered. "It's an original menu concept." I kept looking at Denise. I asked Denise. Denise's face tightened. "Mrs. Stafford." "Gwendolyn," I said. "Please." She nodded. "Gwendolyn, it's an adaptation." "Of what?" Nobody spoke. Nathan looked between us. "What's going on?" I pointed toward the dish. "This is my casserole." Caroline sighed. "Mom." Nathan laughed at first. "Seriously?" "Yes." I looked at him. "Your grandfather's mustard is in it." His smile disappeared. Emily had not touched hers yet. She stared at the dish as if afraid of it. Thomas finally put his phone down. "Caroline." She shook her head. "This is ridiculous." Denise developed a sophisticated version based on several traditional flavor profiles. I almost admired this sentence. It was polished enough to hide anything. "Several?" I asked. "Yes." "Then name another." Caroline stared at me. "Mom, don't make this into a scene. I am sitting at a table asking where a recipe came from. You're the one making it difficult." Denise inhaled. "It was based on a family recipe." The room went silent. Nathan turned toward his mother. "Who's—" Denise didn't answer. She didn't need to. Nathan looked at me. Then Caroline. "You used Grandma's recipe." Caroline folded her arms. "We used it as inspiration. After telling us it didn't belong at the wedding." "That's not what I said." Emily finally spoke. "You said it was outdated." Her voice was quiet. Dangerously quiet. Caroline looked at her. "I said the original presentation was outdated." "No," Emily replied. "You said her recipes were outdated." Caroline's cheeks reddened. "The point is that Denise has transformed it into something appropriate for the venue." Transformed. The word hurt more than it should have, as if 40 years of meals needed rescuing from themselves. I looked down at the beautiful white dish. "Did you photograph my recipe so Denise could make this?" Caroline hesitated. "I provided reference material." "Did you give her my recipe?" "Yes." Finally, one honest word. Nathan leaned back. "Mom, why didn't you just tell Grandma?" Because I knew this would happen. What would happen? This emotional reaction. I stared at my daughter. You took something from my kitchen, lied about taking it photographed, it gave it to a caterer, and then told everyone my cooking wasn't suitable. I was trying to preserve the tradition while improving the execution. I actually laughed, not because anything was funny. Improving it. Denise looked miserable. I want to say something. Caroline turned sharply. Denise. But Denise continued. When I received the recipe, I was told the family wanted the flavors incorporated into a more contemporary dish. Were you told it was mine? I asked. Denise hesitated. No. That answer settled heavily over me. I looked at Caroline. She couldn't meet my eyes. Nathan rubbed his forehead. This is insane. Thomas finally spoke. Maybe we should take a break. No. The voice came from Emily. She was still staring at the casserole. Her face had changed. The anger was gone. In its place was something I couldn't understand. She picked up her fork. Her hand trembled slightly. Emily, Nathan asked. She didn't respond. She took one bite, then another. Her fork stopped halfway back toward the plate. I saw her eyes fill with tears. Nathan touched her arm. What's wrong? Emily looked at me. Not at Caroline. Not Denise. Me. There was recognition in her expression. Deep, unmistakable recognition. She whispered, "Oh my God." My skin prickled. Emily. She swallowed. Then she asked the question that changed the entire room. Mrs. Stafford, is this your Sunday chicken casserole? Caroline's face went completely white. I stared at Emily. How do you know that name? She covered her mouth. A tear slipped down her cheek. Nathan looked bewildered. I leaned forward. Emily, I've never made this for you. I know. Then how could you possibly know what I call it? She looked down at the dish. I've had it before. The room seemed to tilt. Where? Emily wiped her cheek. A long time ago. A long time ago. At whose house? She shook her head. It wasn't at a house. Caroline suddenly stood. This isn't the time. Emily turned toward her. Actually, I think it is. Emily. No. I'd never heard that tone from her. Caroline stopped. Emily looked back at me. When I was 9 years old, my mother got sick. Rebecca, Murfreesboro. The questions Emily had been asking suddenly returned to me. Meal trains, families with cancer, a mother and little girl. My heart began pounding so hard I could hear it. Your mother had breast cancer, I whispered. Emily nodded. Yes. I stared at her face, searching for the child inside it. Nothing came. No clear memory. Just fragments. Rain, apartment buildings, foil pans, Harold driving. Did I know your mother? Emily began crying. You met her once. My throat tightened. I don't remember. I know. She reached into her purse. Caroline moved toward her. Emily, please. Emily stepped away. That was when I realized something else. Caroline wasn't surprised by any of this. She wasn't confused. She was frightened. You knew, I said. Caroline said nothing. I turned back to Emily. What happened when you were 9? Emily opened her purse and reached inside. When my mother was going through treatment, there were nights when she couldn't stand long enough to make dinner. My father was already gone. We didn't have much money. She looked at me. Then people from a church started bringing food. My hands began shaking. And one evening, she continued, a woman showed up carrying a casserole. She paused. Her husband was with her. Harold. I stopped breathing. Emily pulled something from her purse but kept it hidden beneath her hand. I've kept this for 17 years. What is it? She looked down at whatever she was holding, then back at me. Proof that this isn't the first time you fed me. Emily slowly opened her hand. Resting on her palm was an old index card sealed inside a clear plastic sleeve. The card had yellowed around the edges. There was a faded stain near one corner, and a crease ran through the middle, as if it had once been folded and unfolded many times. I recognized the handwriting before I could read the words. Mine. Emily placed the card on the table. At the top, written in blue ink, were the words, Gwendolyn Stafford's Sunday Chicken Casserole. I stared at it. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then I reached toward the card. May I? Emily nodded. My fingers trembled as I lifted it. The handwriting was younger, steadier than mine was now, but unmistakably mine. I turned it over. On the back, I'd written, Bake until golden, freezes well, call if you need anything. Underneath was a phone number we hadn't had in more than 15 years. Oh my lord. The room blurred. Nathan moved closer. Grandma? I wrote this. Emily wiped her eyes. I know. I looked at her. When? 17 years ago. She took a breath. My mother was 38 when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. I was 9. Her voice remained steady at first. My father didn't handle it well. He started staying away more and more. Eventually he left. Nathan reached for her hand. Emily squeezed his fingers. Mom had been working as a receptionist at a dental office, but treatment made it impossible for her to keep working full-time. We were behind on everything. I closed my eyes. A memory moved somewhere inside me. Not a complete picture. Rain against a windshield. Harold asking me to double-check an address. A casserole dish wrapped in a towel. Emily continued. One of Mom's co-workers attended a church that organized meals for us. I whispered, Grace Fellowship. Emily's eyes widened. Yes. My breath caught. Our church had partnered with Grace Fellowship several times. I remember that program. People brought food 3 nights a week. Emily smiled through tears. I hated it at first. Hated it. I was 9. I thought everyone knew we were poor. My heart broke for the child she had been. I used to hide when people knocked. She looked at this recipe card. Then one night you came. I searched her face. I'm sorry. I wish I remembered. Don't apologize. Her voice cracked. That's the whole point. To you it was one evening. To us it was everything. Something inside me gave way. Emily continued. It was raining. My mom had just come home from chemotherapy. She was sick and exhausted. And suddenly I remembered the apartment. Not Emily, not clearly, but Rebecca, a thin woman wearing a headscarf. She'd apologized for the mess before I had even stepped inside. Oh, I whispered. Emily saw recognition in my face. You remember. Your mother had a blue scarf. Emily covered her mouth. Yes. Little white flowers. She nodded rapidly. Yes. The room disappeared. I could see Rebecca again. A small apartment, laundry on the sofa, medical papers on the counter. A little girl watching me from a hallway. You were standing behind a door, I said. Emily started crying harder. I didn't want you to see me. I pressed my hand against my chest. Harold was there. He carried the food. I laughed through my tears. Of course he did. The memory unfolded slowly. Harold had carried the casserole and a bag containing salad bread and something sweet. I remembered setting everything on the kitchen counter. Rebecca had looked mortified. She kept apologizing. For the apartment, for accepting food, for being unable to cook, for needing help. I remember your mother crying. Emily nodded. She cried a lot that year. Then another memory surfaced. Rebecca had whispered, I should be able to feed my own daughter. I had taken her hand, and I had said something I'd forgotten almost immediately afterward. Emily hadn't. You told her, Emily whispered. Needing dinner doesn't mean you failed your family. I closed my eyes. Those words had traveled 17 years farther than I ever expected. I said that. My mother repeated it for years. Emily laughed softly through her tears. Every time she needed help, she'd say, That casserole lady told me needing dinner doesn't mean I failed you. The casserole lady. I started laughing. So did Emily. Even Nathan smiled. For one beautiful moment, Harold felt close enough to touch. Did we stay long? I asked. Maybe 20 minutes. That was all, 20 minutes. 17 years later, Emily still remembered. You left the recipe because Mom loved the casserole. I used to carry copies. I know. Emily touched the card. She made it whenever she felt well enough. Her expression softened. Eventually, it became our comfort food. After Rebecca's first round of treatment, her cancer went into remission. For several years, life became almost normal again. Emily told us Rebecca returned to work. They moved into a better apartment. She watched Emily graduate high school. Then the cancer came back. This time it spread. Rebecca died when Emily was 21. After Mom died, I went through her recipe box. Emily looked at me. This was inside. I held the card tighter. I didn't know who Gwendolyn Stafford was. Of course not. I searched online once, but there were several people with the name. I eventually stopped looking. Then she met Nathan. He had introduced me simply as Grandma Gwen. Emily had visited my house several times without connecting me to the card. Then Nathan mentioned your casserole. My skin prickled. He called it Sunday Chicken Casserole. That's when you started wondering, she nodded. But I wasn't sure. Lots of families make chicken casserole. Then you asked about Murfreesboro. Yes. And the meal trains. Yes. I looked at Caroline. She hadn't moved. Her face remained pale. When did you tell Caroline? Emily hesitated. A few weeks ago. Nathan's head snapped toward his mother. You knew. Caroline opened her mouth. Emily spoke first. I showed her a photograph of the card. The silence that followed felt different. Colder. I remembered Caroline taking pictures of my recipe, taking the original, lying about it, the heritage folder, the dish sitting before me. You knew Emily wanted my casserole because of her mother. Caroline finally spoke. I knew there was a connection. A connection. I could barely believe the word. Emily's voice hardened. I told you exactly what it meant. Nathan looked at his mother. Why didn't you tell Grandma? Caroline rubbed her forehead. Because the wedding has become complicated enough. I stared at her. A woman my husband and I once helped is the mother of the woman marrying my grandson, and you considered that an inconvenience. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Emily reached across and took my hand. My mother would have loved knowing it was you. I looked at her. She would have loved Nathan. Emily smiled. She would have. That nearly broke me. I pictured Harold beside me in that little apartment 17 years earlier. Neither of us had known what would become of the frightened girl hiding near the hallway. We had simply brought dinner, that was all. No grand gesture, no expectation of being remembered. Yet somehow that casserole had traveled from my kitchen to Rebecca's table, from Rebecca's recipe box to Emily's purse, and from Emily's childhood back into my family. I looked at the expensive reinterpretation on the table. Suddenly it seemed almost insulting. Not because Denise had changed the ingredients, because Caroline had removed the story. Emily, I said quietly, did you ask your mother-in-law to serve the original recipe? She looked at Caroline, then back at me. Yes. When 3 weeks ago. And what did she tell you? Caroline stood. Emily, don't. Emily didn't look away from me. She told me you said no. My heart stopped. She told me you didn't want your recipe used at the wedding. I slowly turned toward my daughter. Caroline had lied to me. She had lied to Emily. And now I understood there was another question hiding beneath everything we'd just discovered. If Caroline had told Emily I refused to share my casserole, why had she secretly given that exact recipe to Denise? I looked down at the old card in my hand. For 17 years, it had carried my name. Someone had preserved it because my kindness mattered. My own daughter, meanwhile, had apparently decided my name was the one ingredient that needed to be removed. For several seconds after Emily told me Caroline had claimed I refused to share my recipe, nobody moved. The old card remained in my hand. My name was written across the top in blue ink. Gwendolyn Stafford Sunday Chicken Casserole. 17 years earlier, Rebecca Carter had apparently considered my name worth preserving. My own daughter had spent the last several weeks trying to remove it. I looked at Caroline. Tell me Emily misunderstood. Caroline crossed her arms. This has gotten completely out of proportion. That's not an answer. Nathan leaned forward. Mom, did you tell Emily Grandma refused? Caroline glanced at him. I told Emily that your grandmother wasn't interested in taking on food responsibilities for the wedding. That's not what you told me, Emily said. Her voice was steady now. You said Gwendolyn was uncomfortable having an old personal recipe reproduced for 200 people. I felt something cold settle inside me. I never said anything remotely like that. I know, Emily replied. Caroline shook her head. You were already overwhelmed. Overwhelmed by what? Everything. I stared at her. You've spent 2 months telling people I'm overwhelmed. I'm beginning to wonder why nobody bothered telling me. Thomas shifted in his chair. Caroline, maybe we should just admit there was a communication problem. I turned toward him. No. He blinked. This isn't a communication problem. For once, I didn't soften my words. A communication problem is when someone says Tuesday and another person hears Thursday. Caroline deliberately told people things I never said. Nathan looked at his mother. Why? Caroline's jaw tightened. I was trying to simplify the planning. Emily pointed toward the dish. Then explain that. Everyone looked at the elegant chicken gratin. If Gwendolyn supposedly didn't want her recipe used, Emily continued, why is it sitting on this table? Caroline didn't answer. Denise did. I think I should explain my involvement. Caroline immediately said, that's unnecessary. I disagree. Denise opened the folder she'd brought with her. When Caroline contacted me about developing a heritage dish, she sent me a photograph of a handwritten recipe. My stomach turned. The photograph she took in my kitchen. Denise looked at me. I assume so. Did you know she took the original card without permission? No. Did you know it was my recipe? Denise hesitated. I knew it came from the groom's family. I wasn't given your name. That hurt even though I expected it. What were you told? Denise looked toward Caroline, then back at me. That it was a traditional Whitmore family recipe. Nathan actually laughed, not because it was funny. Whitmore Harold Stafford had helped create that recipe decades before Caroline ever met Thomas Whitmore. I looked at my daughter. Your father's handwriting is on the original. I know. And you called it a Whitmore recipe. It's Nathan's family too. No, you know exactly what you were doing. Caroline's face hardened. Mom, this obsession with credit is embarrassing. That sentence cut through whatever patience I had left. Credit. I placed Emily's old recipe card carefully on the table. This isn't a cookbook contract, Caroline. I'm not asking for royalties. Then why does the name matter so much? I stared at her. Because apparently it mattered enough to you to remove it. Silence. Denise looked down. Then she pulled another sheet from her folder. There is something else you should see. Caroline stood. Denise. Denise ignored her. She slid the page across the table toward me. It was a preliminary reception menu. I scanned the elegant headings until I reached the entree section. My eyes stopped. Caroline Whitmore's Family Farmhouse Chicken. For a moment, I genuinely thought I'd misread it. I read it again. Caroline Whitmore's, my daughter's name, not Stafford, not Harold, not mine. Caroline had taken the recipe she'd called outdated, given it to a caterer, changed its appearance, and put her own name on it. Nathan read over my shoulder. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Emily closed her eyes. Thomas whispered, Caroline. Caroline looked furious. That was a draft. I lifted the paper. With your name. It was temporary. Why was your name ever there? Because someone needed to identify the family connection. Then why not identify the person whose family connection it actually was? Her face flushed. Because Gwendolyn Stafford's Sunday Chicken Casserole sounds like something printed in a church cookbook. There it was. The truth finally spoken without decoration. Emily stared at her. Nathan pushed his chair back. Grandma's name isn't elegant enough for your menu. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. Caroline turned toward him. Nathan, don't twist this. I'm not twisting anything. He pointed toward the menu. You took Grandma's food and slapped your own name on it. I was trying to create continuity between the families. By erasing hers. Caroline looked toward Thomas for support. He didn't give it. Instead, he asked quietly, why didn't you tell me? She seemed stunned. You too. I'm asking a question. Caroline stood completely alone now. And still she couldn't apologize. This wedding has nearly 200 guests. Emily's extended family includes people who are accustomed to polished events. I was trying to make sure everything felt cohesive. Emily's expression hardened. Please stop using my family as an excuse. I'm not. Yes, you are. My mother ate that casserole while she was sick and broke and terrified. Do you honestly think I care whether the name sounds sophisticated? Caroline had no response. Emily picked up her mother's recipe card. This means more to me than anything you've put on those menus. I felt tears burn my eyes. But beneath the sadness, something else was growing. Anger. Not explosive anger. Something steadier. For years, whenever Caroline said something hurtful, I'd searched for the kindest interpretation. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe she didn't mean it. Sitting at that table, I finally stopped translating my daughter's behavior into something easier to forgive. She had lied, repeatedly. She had excluded me deliberately. She had stolen my recipe temporarily. She had used Harold's contribution. She had erased my name. Then she had replaced it with her own. I looked at Caroline. Do you remember learning to make this casserole? She blinked. What? You were 12. Mom, what does that have to do with anything? You stood on a chair because you were too short to see properly into the pot. She looked away. You spilled flour everywhere. I don't remember. I do. My voice cracked. I remember because I thought I was giving you something you'd carry after I was gone. Her face changed, only slightly, but I saw it. I continued. I thought those recipes were part of our family. I never imagined you'd carry them by pretending they came from somewhere else. That's unfair. No, I shook my head. What's unfair is making your mother feel small so you can feel important. Caroline's eyes filled with anger. You have no idea what it was like growing up as your daughter. That surprised me. What is that supposed to mean? She looked away. Suddenly I saw something underneath the cruelty. Something old, something wounded. But understanding it would have to wait. I had one question left. The question I'd been avoiding since that dinner at Caroline's house. I looked at the woman I'd carried inside me, raised, protected, encouraged, and loved for 44 years. When did you become ashamed of me? Nobody spoke. Caroline's face crumpled for one brief second. Then she grabbed her purse. You want the truth? I didn't look away. Yes, she swallowed. Then you're finally going to hear it. Caroline didn't leave. Instead, she put her purse back on the chair and stood behind it with both hands gripping the leather. You want to know when I became ashamed, she said. I don't know. Maybe I always was. The words hurt, but I didn't interrupt. Caroline looked around the table as if she hated having an audience. Then she looked at me. Do you remember my sophomore year of high school? Some of it. Do you remember the winter formal? I nodded slowly. You wore the blue dress. The used blue dress. I understood immediately. I'd bought it at a consignment shop. It had looked brand new. You loved that dress. I loved it until another girl recognized it. Caroline laughed bitterly. Her older sister had donated it. I had never known. She told everyone. Caroline, you know what I did? She looked directly at me. I spent half the dance hiding in the bathroom. My chest tightened. Why didn't you tell me? Because what would you have done? Told me there was nothing wrong with second-hand clothes. Because there isn't. Exactly. The bitterness in her voice startled me. Caroline pulled out her chair and sat. You never understood what it felt like. What felt like? Being the girl whose mother worked in the cafeteria. I went completely still. Nathan whispered, Mom. But Caroline kept going. Kids knew you. Teachers knew you. Everyone knew Mrs. Stafford, who wore an apron and hairnet and handed out lunch. My throat tightened. I was proud of that job. I know. That job paid for your school supplies. It helped pay our mortgage. I know. Then why are you saying it like it was shameful? Caroline's eyes filled. Because to a 15-year-old girl surrounded by kids whose mothers were lawyers and executives it was. There it was. Not a justification, but an explanation. She talked about birthday parties at houses twice the size of ours. Girls arriving at school in new clothes while she wore hand-me-downs from cousins. She remembered Harold's pickup truck with its rusted tailgate. He picked me up in that truck after cheerleading practice, she said. Your father loved that truck. I know, and everyone could hear it coming. Despite everything, I almost smiled. Harold's truck had been loud enough to announce itself from 2 blocks away. Caroline didn't smile. I used to wait until everyone else left before getting in. That hurt more than I expected. Your father never knew. No, I'm glad. She looked at me sharply. Why? Because it would have broken his heart. Caroline looked down. For the first time since the tasting began, anger left her face. I know. The room became quiet. Then she said, Do you remember how people were always coming to our house? Yes. I hated that too. I stared at her. What? Someone always needed something. Food, a ride, a place to sit, money they couldn't repay. We helped people. You helped everybody. Her voice cracked. And everybody thought you were wonderful. I didn't know what to say. Caroline continued. At church, I wasn't Caroline. I was Gwendolyn's daughter. At school, I was Mrs. Stafford's daughter. When Dad fixed something for somebody, people praised both of you. How is that bad? Because I felt like there wasn't any room to be anything else. That surprised me. I had always believed Caroline admired us. Maybe she had. Maybe admiration and resentment could live in the same heart. When I started college, she said, I decided nobody was going to know me that way anymore. She learned how wealthy people dressed, how corporate people spoke, which restaurants to suggest, which wines to order. She worked relentlessly. By 30, she was organizing events for major companies. By 40, she could walk into rooms full of executives and never feel like the cafeteria manager's daughter. Or so she thought. Then Nathan got engaged, she said, and suddenly everything came back. Emily stiffened. My family? No, not you. Caroline looked toward the elegant tasting plates. I wanted one event where everything looked like the life I'd built. I finally understood. The life you built instead of the one you came from. She didn't deny it. Nathan shook his head. Grandma is part of the life you came from. I know. Then why erase her? Caroline flinched. I wasn't trying to erase her. Emily gestured toward the menu. You put your name on her recipe, Caroline closed her eyes. I know how it looks. It looks exactly like what it is, I said. She opened her eyes. I thought if Denise changed it enough, it could represent the family without looking… She stopped. Looking what? She wouldn't say it, so I did. Poor… Her eyes filled with tears. Yes. That one word broke something in me. Not because we'd been poor. There had been years when money was painfully tight. But Harold and I had never considered our home shameful. I thought about him repairing that noisy truck in the driveway. About myself coming home smelling like institutional mashed potatoes. About the envelopes of grocery money we'd quietly slipped to Caroline in college. We had spent years trying to give her more opportunities than we'd had. Somewhere along the way, she'd mistaken our sacrifices for evidence that we were beneath her. I wish you'd told me, I said. What would that have changed? I could have listened. You would have told me money doesn't matter. Money matters plenty when you don't have enough. That surprised her. I know what overdue bills feel like, Caroline. I know what it's like to put groceries back at the register. My voice softened. But I never wanted you to believe the people struggling beside us were lesser people. She wiped her cheek. I didn't. You started believing we were. No. Then why wasn't Stafford good enough for that menu? She had no answer. I leaned forward. I understand being embarrassed at 15. Caroline looked at me. But you're 44, she flinched. You don't get to punish me now for feelings you never told me about then. I wasn't punishing you. You lied about me. I was controlling the planning. You excluded me. I thought you stole my recipe. Her face tightened. I returned it. After lying. Silence. And you used Emily's family story after telling her I didn't want the recipe served. Caroline looked toward Emily. I handled that badly. Badly. Emily shook her head. You knew what that recipe meant to my mother. I know. No, you knew what it meant and still decided presentation mattered more. That finally silenced Caroline. I felt exhausted. Not triumphant, not vindicated, just tired. I understood my daughter better now. But understanding someone's wound doesn't require volunteering to become its next victim. Caroline, I said I love you. She looked at me. I will always love you. Tears slid down her cheeks. But your shame belongs to you. You don't get to make me carry it. She looked away. Then her expression hardened again. Perhaps vulnerability frightened her more than anger. Fine. She gathered the menu pages. If everyone thinks I'm ruining this wedding, then I'll stop trying to incorporate family elements at all. Nathan frowned. What does that mean? It means no casserole, no heritage menu, none of it. Emily stared at her. This isn't your decision. Caroline laughed once. I'm the person who spent months making this wedding happen. Emily stood. And I'm the person getting married. Caroline froze. Emily's voice remained calm. This is not your wedding. No one spoke. Then Emily picked up her mother's recipe card and placed it carefully into her purse. Nathan stood beside her. For the first time, Caroline looked genuinely frightened, not of losing control of the menu, but of losing the people she'd been trying so hard to impress. And as I watched my daughter stand alone beside that elegant table, I realized the next decision couldn't belong to her. It had to belong to Nathan and Emily. Nathan came to my house the next morning. He didn't knock. He still had the key I'd given him when he was 16, and I heard the back door open while I was standing at the kitchen sink. Grandma. In here. He appeared in the doorway carrying 2 coffees. Peace offering. For what? For being 27 years old, and apparently not noticing anything happening in my own family. I took the cup. That's not your fault. I should have asked questions. You were planning a wedding. That's not an excuse. He sat at the table. For once, he didn't open my refrigerator. Tell me everything. I knew what he meant. How much? All of it. So I told him. The dress appointment, the bridal shower, the schedules I never received. Caroline telling Emily that crowds made me anxious. Caroline telling Nathan that wedding planning exhausted me. The recipe card disappearing. The lie about Nathan wanting a keepsake. With every detail, his expression darkened. Mom told me you didn't want to attend the rehearsal walkthrough. I didn't know there was one. His jaw tightened. She said you'd rather just show up at the rehearsal dinner. She never asked me. Nathan leaned back. Why didn't you tell me? There was no accusation in his voice, only hurt. Because I didn't want your wedding to become about me. But you're my grandmother. I know. You helped raise me. I looked down at my coffee. After Nathan was born, Caroline returned to work when he was 3 months old. I kept him 3 days a week for years. I was there when he learned to walk. I packed lunches for preschool. I attended baseball games in weather that should have been illegal. I thought keeping quiet was protecting you, I said. From what conflict? He shook his head. You were protecting Mom from consequences. The words stung because they were true. For years I had called it keeping peace. Maybe sometimes peace was simply silence that benefited the person behaving badly. Nathan reached across the table. I need you to promise me something. What? Stop saying you're fine when you're not. I laughed softly. That's asking a lot from a woman my age. I'm serious. So am I. He smiled briefly. Then his expression changed. There's one more person I need to talk to. I knew immediately. Your father. Nathan nodded. Thomas arrived that evening. Caroline did not come with him. The 3 of us sat in my living room, and Thomas looked more uncomfortable than I'd ever seen him. I owe you an apology, he said. I waited. I knew Caroline was limiting your involvement. Nathan turned toward him. You knew not everything. How much? Thomas rubbed his hands together. I knew about the dress appointment. I knew she told the planner not to contact Gwendolyn directly. I stared at him. Why? She said you were overwhelmed. And you believed her. He looked ashamed. At first. And afterward, he exhaled. I realized there was more going on. Nathan's voice hardened. Then why didn't you say anything? Thomas looked at his son. Because every time I challenged your mother about the wedding, it became an argument. Nathan stared at him. So you let Grandma take the hit? Thomas winced. That's fair. No, I said quietly. It isn't fair, but it's true. Thomas looked at me. I'm sorry. I believed he meant it, but apologies don't erase choices. Caroline has spent years controlling situations by making disagreement exhausting, Thomas admitted. I've gotten too used to avoiding it. I understood that better than he knew. So have I. Nathan looked between us. Then maybe both of you need to stop. That evening I called Caroline. She answered after several rings. What? I want to say something before the wedding. I'm listening. I will be there. She said nothing. I will attend the rehearsal dinner. I will attend the ceremony. I will attend the reception. I will smile in photographs, congratulate Nathan and Emily, and behave with dignity. Okay. But I won't let you speak for me anymore. Her voice cooled. I don't know what that means. It means if someone wants to know whether I'm tired, they can ask me. If someone wants to know whether I want to participate, they can ask me. If someone wants my recipe, they ask me. Mom, I'm not finished. Silence. I love you, Caroline. But loving you doesn't require letting you rewrite my words. She was quiet long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. Then she said, So now I'm some kind of villain. No. That's certainly how everyone is treating me. This isn't about whether you're good or bad, it's about what you did. I was trying to give Nathan a beautiful wedding, and somewhere along the way you decided beauty required removing things you were ashamed of. She inhaled sharply. I already explained myself. You explained why you did it. You haven't taken responsibility for doing it. Another silence. Then Caroline said, Fine. Her voice was icy. Come to the wedding. Just please don't bring food. I almost laughed. I wasn't planning to. I'm serious. So am I. No casserole, no surprise dish, nothing. Caroline, I heard you. She hung up. I stood in the kitchen holding the phone. Part of me wanted to make the biggest casserole dish Tennessee had ever seen and carry it into that reception with both hands. But I wouldn't. Not because Caroline ordered me not to, because this was Nathan and Emily's wedding. I had no intention of turning their day into a battlefield, so I decided I would bring nothing. No casserole, no recipe, no dramatic surprise. I would simply attend as Nathan's grandmother. 2 days later, Emily called. Are you still coming to the rehearsal dinner? Of course. Good. Something about her voice made me suspicious. Emily. Yes. What are you planning? She laughed. Why would you think I'm planning anything? Because you're marrying into my family and I've learned to recognize that tone. She laughed again. I just want you there. That's all. For now. I smiled despite myself. All right. The rehearsal dinner was held the night before the wedding in a private room at a restaurant near the estate. When I arrived, Caroline was already there. She wore navy blue and greeted me politely. Mom. Caroline. Neither of us hugged. It hurt, but pretending would have hurt more. I took my seat beside Nathan. Dinner passed peacefully. Almost too peacefully. Then dessert arrived. Emily stood. She tapped her glass gently with a spoon. I want to do something before tonight ends. Caroline looked up. I saw immediate concern on her face. Emily continued. Tomorrow is about Nathan and me. But tonight I want to recognize a few people whose love helped us become the people standing here. She gave small gifts to her father, who had helped raise her after Rebecca died. Then Emily looked at me. Gwendolyn, would you come up here? Every eye in the room turned toward me. Caroline went completely still. I walked toward Emily. She was holding a small wooden frame. Inside it, protected beneath glass, was a photocopy of the old recipe card. My handwriting, my name, my casserole. Emily took my hand. When I was 9 years old, this woman fed my mother and me during one of the hardest seasons of our lives. The room became silent. Across the table, Caroline lowered her eyes, and I realized Emily was about to tell everyone the story my daughter had tried so hard to hide. Emily stood beside me, holding the framed recipe card, while nearly 40 people waited for her to continue. I could feel Caroline watching us from across the room. Emily took a breath. My mother, Rebecca, was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was 9 years old. Several members of Emily's family lowered their eyes. They knew this part of the story. Treatment made her terribly sick. My father had already started disappearing from our lives, and there were weeks when Mom could barely stand long enough to make toast. Emily's voice trembled. A church organized meals for us. I hated it. A few people looked surprised. Emily smiled sadly. I was 9. I thought accepting food meant everyone knew something was wrong with us. I thought being helped meant we had failed. She looked at me. Then one rainy evening, a woman and her husband knocked on our apartment door. My throat tightened. They brought chicken casserole, bread salad, and dessert. My mother was embarrassed. She kept apologizing for needing help. Emily paused. That woman told her, needing dinner doesn't mean you failed your family. Someone near the back sniffled. I looked down. Harold should have been standing beside me. That thought came so strongly I could almost feel his hand at the small of my back. Emily continued. The woman's name was Gwendolyn Stafford. Now everyone looked at me. She probably stayed 20 minutes. Emily smiled through tears. But my mother remembered her for the rest of her life. My eyes filled. Before Gwendolyn left, she gave Mom a handwritten copy of the casserole recipe. Emily raised the frame. My mother kept it. She told them how Rebecca recovered enough to return to work, how the casserole became something she cooked on better days, how years later after Rebecca died, Emily found the card inside her recipe box. Then I met Nathan. Nathan smiled at her from his seat. I fell in love with him without knowing the woman who fed my mother all those years ago was his grandmother. Soft laughter moved through the room. Emily looked at me. I didn't figure it out until Nathan mentioned his grandmother's Sunday Chicken Casserole. She touched the glass covering the card. When I saw the name Gwendolyn Stafford again, I started wondering if something impossible had happened. I wiped my cheek. Emily took my hand. It had. The room applauded. Not loudly at first. Then everyone stood. I didn't know what to do with that. I hadn't rescued Rebecca. I hadn't paid her bills. I hadn't cured her cancer. I'd made dinner. That was all. Yet 17 years later, people were standing because of it. I looked toward Caroline. She was the only person still seated. Her face wasn't angry. That almost made it worse. She looked devastated. Emily hugged me. I wanted people to know. I whispered, thank you. Then she handed me the frame. This is yours. No. She looked surprised. The original belongs to you. I touched the glass. This copy belongs to both families now. Her eyes filled again. Then we'll keep it somewhere everyone can see it. Nathan came forward and wrapped his arms around both of us. Grandpa would have loved this. I laughed through my tears. He would have taken credit for the mustard. That made Nathan laugh. The tension in the room finally broke. People returned to their seats. Dinner continued, but the atmosphere had changed. Several of Emily's relatives approached me. Her Aunt Susan remembered Rebecca talking about the casserole lady. A cousin told me Rebecca had served that dish at Christmas more than once. One older woman squeezed my hands. You gave her dignity when she felt like she'd lost it. That sentence stayed with me. Across the room, Caroline remained unusually quiet. I didn't approach her. For once, I didn't rush to make her comfortable. After dessert, I stepped outside onto the restaurant terrace. The Tennessee night was warm, and strings of lights hung above the railing. I heard the door open behind me. Caroline, I waited. That was quite a speech, she said. It was. You knew she was going to do that. No. Caroline folded her arms. I suppose everyone thinks I'm horrible now. I turned toward her. Why is that the first place your mind goes? What do you mean? Emily just told you that something your father and I did 17 years ago helped her mother through cancer, and your first concern is what people think about you. Caroline looked away. I don't know what you want from me. Nothing tonight. That surprised her. I'm not asking you to fix anything before the wedding. I'm not asking you to apologize because there's an audience. She swallowed. Then what? I want you to think. About what? Why seeing people appreciate where you came from feels like an attack. She didn't answer. I returned inside. Later, as guests began leaving, Emily found me near the coat room. One more thing, I smiled. I'm afraid to ask. She lowered her voice. I made a change to tomorrow's menu. I glanced toward Caroline. Does she know? No. Emily. It's my wedding. I couldn't argue with that. What did you change? She smiled. You'll see. Does Denise know? Yes. That explained why Denise had texted Emily twice during dinner. Is this going to cause trouble? Emily considered the question. Probably. I sighed. She squeezed my hand. But I promise I'm not doing it to humiliate Caroline. Then why? Because tomorrow Nathan and I are starting a family. Her expression became serious. And I don't want that family to begin with a lie. I looked at her. What lie? That traditions become embarrassing just because they're simple. Before I could respond, Nathan called her. Emily kissed my cheek. Tomorrow. Then she disappeared into the dining room. I drove home thinking about her words. I had spent weeks worrying about whether my casserole belonged at an elegant wedding. Suddenly, that question seemed foolish. Food didn't understand class. Memories didn't know what things cost. Rebecca hadn't cared whether dinner arrived on fine china. She'd cared that her daughter was fed. When I got home, I went upstairs and opened the fireproof box. My original recipe card was still inside. I ran my finger over Harold's handwriting. More Dijon. Trust me. You've caused a lot of trouble, I whispered. Then I laughed. The next morning I dressed carefully. I wore a deep plum dress, pearl earrings Harold had given me for our 30th anniversary, and comfortable shoes because I intended to dance with my grandson. I brought no food, just as I'd promised. When I arrived at the estate, everything looked breathtaking. White flowers lined the ceremony space. Music drifted through the gardens. Caroline was already directing people near the reception hall. She saw me. For a moment, I expected criticism. Instead, she simply said, "You look nice, Mom." Thank you. It was small, but it was something. Hours later, after Nathan and Emily exchanged vows beneath the oak trees, we moved toward the reception hall. Guests gathered near a large display showing the evening menu. I wasn't looking for anything special. Then I saw Caroline standing in front of it. She wasn't moving. Her face had gone pale. I followed her gaze. Beneath the entree selections, one line had been changed. And this time, nobody had removed my name. It was printed large enough for every guest to read. Gwendolyn Stafford, Sunday Chicken Casserole. Underneath, in smaller letters, in memory of Harold Stafford and Rebecca Carter. My hand flew to my mouth, and behind me, Emily whispered, "Now it's telling the right story." For a long moment, I couldn't take my eyes off the menu. Gwendolyn Stafford's Sunday Chicken Casserole. My name, not Caroline's. Not some polished phrase about farmhouse chicken or heritage gratin. Mine. And beneath it, in memory of Harold Stafford and Rebecca Carter. I read Harold's name again. My vision blurred. Emily. She slipped her arm through mine. Are you upset? I turned toward her. Upset. I didn't ask you first. I laughed through the tears. No, sweetheart. I touched Harold's name on the printed display. I just wish he could see this. Nathan came up beside us. I think Grandpa would have complained that his name should be above yours because he invented the mustard. I laughed harder. That's exactly what he'd say. Nathan kissed my cheek. Then we'll give him credit at the table. Behind us, Caroline remained completely still. Emily turned toward her. I should have told you about the menu change. Caroline looked at the display. You went around me. I made a decision about my wedding. I've spent months coordinating this. And I'm grateful for the work you've done. Emily's voice stayed gentle. But I wasn't going to let Gwendolyn's recipe appear under a false name. Caroline glanced at me. I expected anger. Instead, she looked tired. Is Denise serving the original version? Yes. Caroline closed her eyes briefly. The plating won't match the rest of the menu. Nathan sighed. Mom, what I'm just saying. Then she stopped herself. Perhaps she heard how ridiculous it sounded. 100 yards away, guests were laughing beneath oak trees. She had a new daughter-in-law standing in front of her. Her son had just gotten married, and Caroline was worried about casserole plating. She looked at the menu again. Fine. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't a fight either. She walked into the reception hall. I watched her go. Emily squeezed my arm. She'll need time. So will I. Inside the room looked extraordinary. Candles flickered across long tables. White flowers spilled from low arrangements, and warm lights hung from the beams overhead. Caroline had created something beautiful. I could acknowledge that without forgetting what she'd done. That was one of the lessons I was beginning to understand. People weren't only one thing. Caroline could be talented and cruel, generous and controlling, wounded and responsible for the wounds she caused. Dinner began after the first dances. Then Denise appeared beside me. Gwendolyn, I smiled. Denise, I owe you an apology. You didn't know. I should have asked more questions. She looked toward the kitchen. Would you like to see something? I followed her. Near the service area, several enormous casserole dishes sat on warming racks. No elegant individual gratins, no brioche towers, no decorative herbs arranged with tweezers, just golden casserole. I recognized it immediately. You used biscuit topping. Exactly as written. I leaned closer. And the mustard. Denise smiled. I followed Harold's instructions. More Dijon. She laughed. No, I followed yours. For the first time that day, I cried in a kitchen. Denise hugged me. I've catered hundreds of weddings, she said. People rarely remember the most expensive thing we serve. What do they remember? The thing that means something. When the casserole reached the tables, I expected people to take small portions. Instead, servers came back asking for more. Nathan's friends loved it. Emily's Aunt Susan came to my table and told me it tasted exactly as she remembered Rebecca making it. Then something unexpected happened. People began asking me about the recipe. Not because it was sophisticated, because they'd heard Emily's story from the rehearsal dinner. An older man told me his wife used to organize meal trains. A woman from Emily's family said someone had once brought lasagna to her house after her husband died and she'd never forgotten it. The casserole became a conversation about kindness. Caroline sat 3 tables away. I saw her watching. For years she had believed my food announced where we'd lacked money. That night it announced something entirely different. It told people what we'd valued. Halfway through dinner, Nathan stood with his glass. I wasn't planning to make this toast yet, he said, but apparently Grandma's casserole is stealing attention from my marriage. Everyone laughed. I covered my face. Nathan smiled at me. My grandfather Harold died 4 years ago. I wish he were here. My throat tightened. And Emily wishes her mom Rebecca were here. Emily reached for his hand. Somehow tonight there's a dish on these tables that connects both of them. The room quieted. My grandparents carried it into Rebecca's apartment 17 years ago. Now I'm married to her daughter. Nathan shook his head. I don't know what you call that. Fate, someone shouted. Another person said, God. Nathan smiled. Maybe both. He raised his glass. To the people who feed us when life gets hard. Everyone raised theirs. And to Grandma Gwen. Applause filled the room. I cried openly. I didn't care. Across the room, Caroline wasn't clapping at first. Then slowly she lifted her hands. Our eyes met. There was no anger in hers, only something that looked almost like regret. After dinner, guests began dancing. I danced with Nathan. I danced with Thomas. Even Denise pulled me onto the floor for half a song. For the first time in months, I stopped thinking about Caroline. Then I realized she was gone. Her chair was empty. Her purse had disappeared. I searched the reception hall. Nothing. The terrace. Nothing. Thomas noticed. Have you seen Caroline? No. He checked his phone. No message. My stomach tightened. After everything that had happened, I didn't know what her leaving meant. Maybe she was furious. Maybe she'd decided she couldn't tolerate watching people celebrate something she'd tried to hide. I didn't want drama on Nathan's wedding night. Should we look for her? Thomas asked. Before I could answer, Emily approached. What's wrong? Caroline's gone. Emily's smile faded. Nathan joined us. Mom left. Thomas shook his head. Her car is still outside. That was something. We agreed not to make an announcement. The music continued. I slipped away toward the hallway near the bridal suite. That's where I found her. Caroline was sitting alone on a bench. Her shoulders were shaking. For one terrible second, she looked like the teenage girl she'd described at the tasting. The girl hiding in a bathroom because someone recognized her secondhand dress. I stood several feet away. Caroline, she wiped her face. Please don't. Don't what? Tell me you were right. I sat beside her. I didn't come here to do that. She stared at the floor. I spent my whole life trying to get away from that kitchen. My chest tightened. And tonight everybody loves you because of it. There was no accusation in her voice this time, only exhaustion. I waited. She looked at me. I thought if I became successful enough, nobody could ever make me feel small again. I said nothing. A tear slipped down her cheek. But I'm the one who made you feel small. That was the first time Caroline had said it herself. Before I could respond, music from the reception hall softened. The speeches were about to begin. Caroline stood. She looked terrified. Mom. Yes. I need to do something. What? She looked toward the reception hall. Something I should have done before any of this happened. Then she walked past me toward the ballroom. I followed several steps behind. As we entered, Caroline went directly toward the DJ. She whispered something to him. He handed her the microphone. The room gradually fell silent. Nathan looked confused. Emily reached for his hand. Caroline stood alone beneath the warm reception lights. Then she looked directly at me. I wasn't scheduled to give a speech, she began. Her voice trembled. But there's something I need to say while the people I've lied to are still in the room. Caroline stood beneath the reception lights with the microphone held in both hands. For once, my daughter looked completely unprepared. There was no folder, no schedule, no polished presentation, just Caroline. I've spent most of the last several months trying to make this wedding perfect, she began. A few guests smiled politely. Caroline didn't. The problem is somewhere along the way, I started believing perfect meant removing anything I thought wasn't impressive enough. The room became quieter. Nathan watched his mother carefully. Emily held his hand. Caroline looked at me. My mother made the casserole you ate tonight. Several guests nodded. You already know that because her name is on the menu. She paused. But it almost wasn't. My stomach tightened. Caroline swallowed. I took her recipe without permission. A murmur moved through the room. I gave it to the caterer and asked her to make it look more sophisticated. Denise stood near the kitchen doors listening. And then I did something worse. Caroline's voice cracked. I put my own name on it. Thomas lowered his head. I stayed still. Caroline continued. My mother worked in an elementary school cafeteria for more than 30 years. My father worked maintenance. We didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up. She gave a small, painful laugh. I spent years pretending that didn't bother me. Her eyes filled. But it did. Nobody moved. I was embarrassed by secondhand clothes. I was embarrassed by my father's old truck. I was embarrassed when people knew what my mother did for a living. She looked directly at me. And instead of growing out of that shame, I dressed it up. The words landed heavily. I called it ambition, standards, presentation. She shook her head. But tonight I realized something. Caroline glanced toward the tables where empty casserole dishes sat among elegant china. I spent my whole adult life trying to become the kind of person who could afford a wedding like this. Her voice softened. And my mother spent her life becoming the kind of person a frightened woman remembered 17 years after she brought her dinner. My eyes filled instantly. Caroline wiped her cheek. I don't know when I started confusing sophistication with worth. She looked toward Emily. I lied to you. Emily's expression softened but remained serious. I told you Gwendolyn didn't want her casserole served because I didn't want it served under her name. Caroline turned toward Nathan. I lied to you too. I told you your grandmother was tired and didn't want to be involved. Nathan's jaw tightened. I'm sorry. Then Caroline looked back at me. And Mom? Her voice broke. I made you smaller so I could feel bigger. I stopped breathing. I told people you were overwhelmed. I left you out. I spoke for you. I made jokes about the food you fed me my whole childhood. Tears rolled freely down her face now. And then I stole the very thing I claimed was beneath me. No one interrupted. I don't expect one speech to fix that. That mattered to me. If Caroline had asked for instant forgiveness in front of 200 people, I might have walked away. Instead, she said, I just didn't want another day to pass with me pretending I hadn't done it. She lowered the microphone. I'm sorry, Mom. The room remained silent. Everyone looked at me. I hated that part. Forgiveness should never become a performance demanded by an audience. So I didn't stand. I didn't rush across the room and embrace Caroline because people were watching. I simply nodded. Caroline understood. She handed the microphone back to the DJ. A few people applauded. Then more joined. I didn't. Not because I wanted to punish her, because an apology wasn't entertainment. The music resumed quietly. Caroline walked toward the terrace. I waited several minutes before following. She stood beneath the string lights with her arms wrapped around herself. That was brave, I said. She turned. I was terrified. Bravery usually requires that. She smiled weakly. Do you forgive me? There it was, the question everyone expected. But my answer wasn't the one Caroline wanted. I love you. Her smile disappeared. That's not what I asked. I know. I stepped closer. Caroline, forgiveness isn't pretending nothing happened. I know. Do you? She looked down. For most of my life, when you hurt my feelings, I rushed to make things comfortable again. She said nothing. I told myself that's what mothers do. My voice trembled. But I think I taught you something terrible. She looked at me. What? That hurting me had no consequences. Her eyes filled again. I don't want to do that anymore. So you're not forgiving me. I didn't say that. I took her hand. I am choosing not to carry hatred toward you. She squeezed my fingers. But trust is different. Her face crumpled slightly. Trust has to be rebuilt. How? By telling the truth when nobody is watching. She nodded. By letting me speak for myself. Another nod. By not treating your past like something you survived instead of something that formed you. She wiped her cheek. And by understanding that an apology doesn't erase a pattern. Actions change patterns. Caroline stared toward the gardens. I don't know how long that takes. Neither do I. What if I mess up? You probably will. She laughed unexpectedly. So will I. That was the first moment all evening that felt normal. Then Caroline looked at me. Was it really that bad growing up? The question surprised me. Sometimes. She frowned. You always acted like everything was fine. Because you were a child. Did you ever go without things because of me? I smiled. Every parent goes without something. Mom, I sighed. There were months your father and I paid bills in an order that would have terrified you. She closed her eyes. But you never made me feel poor. We weren't poor in everything. She looked at me. We had enough love, enough food, enough people who would show up when things went wrong. I squeezed her hand. That's a kind of wealth, too. Caroline began crying again. This time I hugged her. Not because the audience expected it. There wasn't one. Not because everything was repaired. It wasn't. I hugged my daughter because I loved her. She held me tightly. I'm sorry. I know. When we returned inside, Nathan saw us. He didn't ask whether everything was fixed. He simply kissed his mother's cheek, then mine. Emily joined us. Caroline looked at her. I owe you more than a public apology. Emily nodded. Yes, you do. Caroline almost laughed. I appreciate the honesty. I learned it from your mother. That actually made all four of us smile. Later, the DJ played an old song Harold loved. Thomas asked me to dance. Halfway through, Caroline stepped onto the floor with Nathan. I watched my daughter laughing with her son. She looked lighter. Not transformed, not magically healed, just lighter. Before the night ended, Denise packed a small container of leftover casserole for me. "For tomorrow," she said. I smiled. "Thank you." When I got home after midnight, I placed it in the refrigerator. For the first time since Harold died, I didn't feel lonely entering the quiet kitchen. Something had shifted. Not just between Caroline and me, inside me. I had spent years believing love meant making myself smaller whenever someone else needed more room. But love wasn't supposed to erase anyone, and neither was forgiveness. The wedding hadn't repaired our family. It had simply forced us to stop pretending nothing was broken. The repair would come later, slowly, one honest conversation at a time. And surprisingly, it would begin in the very kitchen Caroline had spent half her life trying to escape. The first time Caroline came back to my kitchen after the wedding, she stood in the doorway as though she needed permission to enter. It was 3 weeks later. I was peeling apples when I heard a knock on the back door. That alone told me something had changed. Caroline had spent 44 years walking into my house without knocking. I opened the door. She held a grocery bag. "I brought lunch." I stepped aside. "You know you don't have to knock." She gave me a small smile. "I know. I thought maybe I should start." That sentence told me more than another apology could have. We ate sandwiches at the kitchen table. There was no dramatic conversation. She didn't ask whether I'd forgiven her yet. I didn't remind her of the wedding. We talked about ordinary things. Nathan and Emily's honeymoon. Thomas's latest attempt to fix their garage door. My neighbor's dog digging underneath my fence. It felt awkward. But honest awkwardness was better than comfortable pretending. Caroline began visiting every week or two. Sometimes she called first. Sometimes she asked questions instead of making decisions for me. That sounds like a small thing. It wasn't. One afternoon she asked, "Would you like to come with me?" instead of, "You probably don't want to go." I nearly cried over the difference. Trust returned in inches, just as it had disappeared. Then one Saturday morning, Caroline surprised me. She arrived wearing jean sneakers and an old sweatshirt. "What happened to you?" I asked. She laughed. "Very funny." "Where are we going?" "Grace Fellowship." I stared at her. "Why?" "They're doing meal deliveries." I didn't speak. Caroline looked suddenly nervous. "I called them." "You did?" I asked whether they needed volunteers. My throat tightened. "And?" "They said yes." So we spent that Saturday packing meals for families dealing with illness. Caroline worked beside women who didn't care what kind of events she planned. Nobody asked about her house. Nobody cared what she wore. We filled containers with chicken, vegetables, rolls, and cookies. At one point, Caroline looked around the church kitchen. "You did this for years. Decades. For free." I laughed. "That's usually how volunteering works." She rolled her eyes, then her expression softened. "I understand it more now." "Understand what?" "Why you kept doing it." I looked toward a row of meals waiting to be delivered. "Sometimes people don't need you to change their life." I thought of Rebecca. "They just need you to make one night easier." Caroline nodded. That afternoon, we delivered dinner to an older man recovering from surgery. On the drive home, Caroline was unusually quiet. Then she said, "I wish Dad could have seen me today." I smiled. "He did." She looked at me. "You really believe that?" "Some days I have to." A month later, Nathan and Emily came over on Sunday. Emily carried her mother's original recipe card. "I want you to teach me." "Teach you what?" She held up the card. "The real version." Nathan groaned. "Finally." I pointed at him. "You know where the kitchen is." "I've been banned from quality control." "Because quality control kept eating the ingredients." Emily tied on one of my aprons. "We started with celery, then onion, chicken, cream, sage." When we reached the mustard, Nathan reached for the jar. I slapped his hand away. "Your grandfather already caused enough trouble with that ingredient." Emily laughed. "How much?" I held up the measuring spoon. This much. Nathan frowned. Grandpa wrote more. Your grandfather was wrong. Family history says otherwise. We laughed so hard I had to put the spoon down. Caroline arrived halfway through. She stood in the doorway watching us. For 1 second I wondered whether the old resentment would return. Instead, she said, "You're adding too much sage." I stared at her. Emily looked at me. Nathan whispered, "Dangerous move, Mom." Caroline laughed. Then she came into the kitchen. "Give me an apron." That afternoon, 4 generations of memory crowded around one stove. Harold was there in every joke. Rebecca was there in Emily's old card. And for once, Caroline didn't seem ashamed of any of it. Later, Nathan set his phone against a jar. "What are you doing, recording?" "No." "Yes." I look terrible. "Grandma, future generations need evidence that you bullied everyone in this kitchen." I pointed a wooden spoon at him. "Turn that thing off." He didn't. Eventually, the recordings became a project. Nathan filmed me making cornbread, peach cobbler biscuits, pot roast, and Sunday chicken casserole. But he didn't only record ingredients. He asked questions. "Who taught you this? When did Grandpa eat this? Who did you make it for? What happened that Christmas?" Recipes became stories. Emily suggested making copies of my recipe collection for the family. So I spent several weeks organizing everything. I made one book for Caroline, one for Nathan and Emily, and one extra copy for whoever came next. Grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Whoever someday stood in a kitchen wondering why Dijon mustard belonged in chicken casserole. On the first page I wrote, "Recipes aren't important because they're old. They're important because of who was fed when they needed feeding." Caroline read that sentence twice, then she hugged me. 6 months after the wedding, we gathered at my house for Sunday dinner. Nothing was fancy. The dining table still had a scratch Harold made while repairing a lamp. One chair wobbled. My serving dishes didn't match. The casserole sat in the middle of the table. Caroline brought green beans. Emily brought rolls. Nathan brought wine and took credit for contributing the most important item. Thomas told him grapes required less skill than vegetables. Everyone laughed. I looked around my table. For years after Harold died, his empty chair had hurt. I used to avoid looking at it. That evening, I looked directly at it. The chair was still empty, but the room wasn't. Nathan was telling a story. Emily was laughing. Thomas was reaching for seconds. Caroline was arguing that she'd been right about the sage. I watched my daughter. She caught me staring. "What? Nothing." "Mom," I smiled. "I'm just glad you're here." Her expression softened. "Me too." Then she reached for the casserole. "Can I have more?" I raised an eyebrow. "Of that outdated recipe," she groaned. "I deserve that." Nathan nearly choked laughing. Caroline put another spoonful on her plate. For the record, I was an idiot. "For the record," I said, "it's already in the family history." That made everyone laugh. And suddenly I understood something. The casserole hadn't saved our family. Truth had. The casserole simply forced us to sit at the same table long enough to face it. Caroline and I would never recover the years she spent being ashamed of where she came from. I couldn't erase the things she said. She couldn't undo the lies. But healing wasn't going backward and pretending the wound never happened. Healing was building something more honest after it did. That night, after everyone left, I carried the empty casserole dish to the sink. I could almost hear Harold. "It's the mustard." I laughed. "Don't start." The kitchen was quiet, but it no longer felt lonely. Because love had traveled through that room for decades. From my mother to me, from Harold to our recipe, from our kitchen to Rebecca's apartment, from Rebecca to Emily, from Emily back to Nathan, and finally somehow back to Caroline. The table hadn't become more elegant. It had simply become bigger, and at 68 years old I finally understood that nothing made with love becomes outdated just because someone is embarrassed by where it came from.